Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, and joining us tonight, Deputy Nationals Leader Fiona Nash, author and comedian Magda Szubanski, rock and roll legend Jimmy Barnes, outspoken Tasmanian Senator Jacqui Lambie, and the manager of opposition business Tony Burke. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Now, Q&A is live in the eastern states on ABC TV. It's live on News 24 everywhere else, and you can also watch and listen live on iView, on News Radio and on Facebook. Now, Magda, I just introduced you by the name that everyone knows you as. What's your full name in Polish?
You mean Magda Szubanski.
Yeah.
The way my father would have said my name, Magdalena Maria Teresa Szubańska, which
nicer.
is a bit nicer than Magda Szubanski. So
It is. It's beautiful, and it's the first time we've heard you introduced like that. I couldn't do it myself, so thanks for that. But let's go to our very first question tonight, which comes from Jack Lattimore.
Magda, you are strongly opposed to a plebiscite on marriage equality. While I don't support a plebiscite either, I have reservations about the Labor Party blocking it, as it will likely mean having to wait for at least another term of Parliament. Is it worth waiting another 3 years or more for equality? Or could this ongoing discrimination actually be more harmful than a shorter 6-month burst of hateful language from opponents of equality?
One of my primary concerns is the cost of it, because much as I think that my rights are very important, I'm also very concerned about the broader community. And you may have seen that thing that's going around on Facebook about the number of nurses. 477 nurses could be employed for 4 years. A lot of us in the LGBTQI community don't want this money spent and as we see it, wasted for what is essentially an expensive opinion poll that won't be binding, when we already know from several polls already that the majority of people in the country are in favour. So that's one of the reasons for me. I really would prefer to see that money spent for aged care, for hospitals, you know. But I do also, of course, think that LGBTQI rights are very important, not just for us, but because of what they say about the country, that we are a democracy and equality before the law is an absolute foundation of democracy.
Yeah. Magda, just on the... thank you. On the politics of this, do you accept that Malcolm Turnbull, with his wafer-thin majority, can't afford to alienate backbenchers like George Christensen?
Well, George Christensen, I had a look at the figures, and his primary vote was 38,000 people. His two-party preferred vote was 48,000 people. There are 23,500,000 people in this country, 72% of whom are in favour of marriage equality. So what gives George Christensen this amount of power? And why is Malcolm Turnbull caving into him? What is going on in a democracy that the majority, by far the majority view, is not being represented? People get frustrated, and then they kind of get frustrated with gays, like, we want this issue to go away. Well, so do we want it resolved. But who's blocking it? Who's stopping it, and what gives them the right to do that?
Magda, do you think it's a bit odd that they didn't have a plebiscite to change it in the first place? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody asked me to vote whether they should change the marriage laws. You know,
No,
and it's really. I remember when Malcolm came into power, and it was the shining light. Everything's going to change, and I just thought it was, you know, really very sad that someone who comes and takes over, you know, as Prime Minister of our country, can't even stick to his own sort of, you know, standards, what he believes in.
He's got to worry about politics, though.
Yeah, but I mean, a leader for me has to be able to stand his own ground on human rights, and this is about equality and about, you know, it's a basic, you know, right that we have, and if he can turn around just to keep his job, you know, change his opinion, it's not good enough for me.
Tony, if I could jump in.
Let's hear from Fiona.
I think Malcolm's actually being really strong on it, Jimmy. I think he's actually giving every Australian the right to have their say on this issue. And this is a really, really important issue for a lot of Australians. There are other options, obviously, but the plebiscite gives every single Australian the right to have a say in that vote.
Just a quick question for you.
Hang on.
Just
let me finish the first answer.
No, but just a quick question, Fiona. Is it important enough to turn it into a binding vote for politicians?
Well, it's not a binding vote, and people are well aware of that. But everyone that I'm speaking to, there are some that have indicated that they will not be bound by the plebiscite. But the great majority of my colleagues that I'm talking to are very happy to. I've been very clear that I will vote for the legislation whatever the plebiscite decides, and that's what the majority of my colleagues are saying to me.
Can I dispute with you that this is it's being portrayed as though this is a threat to society? Jimmy and I, you're saying this is a serious issue.
Well, I'm not saying it's a threat.
It's so serious that it requires a plebiscite.
I never said it. No, hang on. I never said it was a threat.
No, I'm not saying you said that, but other people are saying that. You're saying it is such a grave issue that every single Australian must vote on this. Why? Why not vote on other issues like superannuation? Why not a plebiscite on that? Why not a plebiscite on aged care? Those people are living below the poverty line. Why not a plebiscite on that? Now, Jimmy and I are actually family. I'm the godmother of his granddaughter.
Yes.
He's a Scottish migrant. I'm a Polish, Scottish, Irish migrant. His wife is Thai. I'm a leso. We are that modern family. What threat does it pose except that I don't have the same rights as the other people in my family?
It's not
I don't think we should be spending $170 million or whatever it is when there's people sleeping on the streets in Australia. There's kids that are hungry. There's families that need counselling to deal with domestic violence. All sorts of better ways of spending money than a non-binding plebiscite, which can they just get there. And the heavyweights in your party can sort of influence the vote anyway. I really don't know if it's going to do any good.
Hang on a second.
Hang on a second. Not being your party, sorry.
How's that democracy at work?
What is that? What is the heavyweights?
Well,
why
is Malcolm towing the line? Why is there are people within the party who influence how the party votes? Obviously. Is that not true?
Many things on
Guys, this has gone off to such a flying start that we've left two of our panellists out of the action. I'll bring Tony Burke in, who's been listening carefully, and of course Labor's got a big decision to make on this. Are you going to block it in the Senate?
Yeah, we've got, look, our meeting's a few weeks away before we deal with it.
What do your instincts tell you?
Well, we've been pretty critical of it, and
so what do your instincts tell you?
My instincts tell me that we're going to end up opposing it.
That's a shame.
If the intention is to have equality, it's not equality if you pick this as the one issue in the last 100 years that you have to have a plebiscite over. That's not equality. And the point that Magda makes where, why this and no other issue? I can't get my head around that.
Well, I can. I can answer that for you. At this point in time, this is an issue that if we give all Australians the opportunity to have a say, then they are all invested in the outcome. That will remove this potential division we're seeing. And hang on just a sec. I genuinely believe, I trust the Australian people to be able to have a calm and sensible debate about this. I don't buy into this whole argument that we're going to have this horrendous outcome of outpouring that's going to be terribly negative. Certainly there may be instances of that, but by and large, I trust the Australian people to be able to deal with this.
Guys, I'm just going to go back to our questioner. Jack Lattimore has his hand up. I was going to go back to Jack. Go ahead.
I just have one point for Ms Nash. Before the plebiscite, or before you voted on the plebiscite in the party room, you had a binding vote against. You didn't allow a free vote for marriage equality. I think it's quite hypocritical of the coalition to then say, or members of the coalition to say, you know what, we'll ignore the free vote or the plebiscite and we'll go forward for a free vote and vote against it no matter what. I think that's like quite offensive. And if you can go from one position before the plebiscite and then change that position after it based on sort of your parliamentary procedures, I think that's a problem as well.
But I think that's an issue where you've seen a couple of people, parliamentarians make that point.
Yes,
so I don't think you can tar every politician with that brush. And in the coalition, we don't require those of us in the coalition, unlike Labor, to always have the same view. I genuinely believe that the majority will treat it that with the respect that it deserves, that what the Australian people decide will be reflected. And I think
I agree too. I think I have a great faith in the Australian public, and I have to say, as I go around the country, I'm treated very well. But I want a good reason why this would be so divisive that we have to bring everyone. What is the disaster that will unfold if we just pass it like every other? There have been 20 bills all knocked back. Now, I'm not saying Labor has been great on this record, has a great record either. They've had their own right-wing elements that have blocked it as well. So what is it that would be so terrible if we just passed it as legislation when all the surveys are showing 72% or thereabouts are in favour? How is that massively divisive?
Well, the government might well fall because you could get defections and there's a political consequence.
Oh, how terrible for the politicians.
Actually, I haven't heard from Jacqui Lambie.
Do you know...
unaccustomed as you are to public speaking.
Oh, no.
You know, when it comes to referendums and alike, there is plenty of other countries around the world. This is just the run of the mill. It's just so don't usually do this. But you know what? It's about time we gave the power back to the people. And if I had my own way, I'd be getting 3 for the price of 2 because I've had it costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office. Yeah, more bang for your buck. That's correct. And you know what? We could look at euthanasia for the terminally ill. We could go ahead and discuss that. And reconciliation. The Indigenous have been out there for years and years and years waiting to be recognised.
But Jacqui,
so you know what? Why do we decide this is more important than those other 2 subjects? So I say, you know what? Let's do it. Let's take it in 12 months' time. Let's take the 3 of them till next September and let's make it a referendum, make it count, and whatever the public decides, then we get 3 for the price of 2 and we start doing this more in the future. Give you people the say.
Eventually we won't need you guys.
You know what? With modern technology, it's like our elections. We should know the next day on who's going to win those seats. It's only the lack of will that is stopping us and stopping you people from having more say on what goes on in this country.
Magda, what's wrong with that argument?
Well, if we were to institute a plebiscite for each piece of legislation, it would become unworkable. How often do you have them? Why is this being singled out? If it was put up with a whole lot of other pieces of legislation, if you could press it, well, first of all, they couldn't get census to work. So the idea that you could get the entire, you know, I'd love the idea that instead of just having representatives, and I'm sorry you would all be out of work, that we could all just vote on things and let the majority decide. But that's not the way it works. We employ representatives to express our needs. But I want to address you on a more personal level, Jacqui, because you have an unconventional family yourself. You know, you're a single mother. I would fully support you in that and always have. And it's been because people have pushed through humane reforms that, like, you know, however many decades ago, you would have been treated terribly. I think that is so wrong, but that's what's happening to me and my community now.
Do you know, there is plenty of single mums out there and they are still being treated really wrong. You know, they get stuck on the welfare system. Their kids are taken to bits at school. So, you know what, then I think...
And I will stick up for them every time.
I come from a traditional family. My mum and dad, you know, married, heterosexual family, and they weren't good parents. And you know, I don't think that definitely just because, you know, this is the model of what makes a good family, what makes a good, you know, it's not necessarily right for the Australian family anymore. It's a modern... times have changed.
Well, it never has been.
And the other thing I don't like is the government keeps saying, oh, you know, we promised this at the election that we're going to do this. So what? You promise everything and change your mind every year. Why suddenly stick your guns on this?
OK, I'm going to go to... We've got another question on this topic. It's from Julia Easto.
Beyond Blue published a report in 2013 that same-sex attracted Australians have up to 14 times higher rates of suicide attempts than their heterosexual peers. What do you think we can do to alleviate these suicide attempts?
Now, Magda, I'll go to you on this first, and I suppose we could bear in mind here that Bill Shorten has made the case that he believes the plebiscite could actually be bad, negative in that sense.
Look, I think we have to have, first of all, the idea that that LGBTQI people should have a differently named form of union rather than calling it marriage. I do believe in equality under the law, and I think that sends a very strong message. If you want to look at the importance of symbolism, think about Rosa Parks. Now, she refused to sit at the back of the bus. She still would have got to her destination, but we know what the back of the bus means. It's humiliating, it's denigrating. It means that you are not considered to be a fully human person. Every time they knock back those bills in Parliament, how do you think we feel? We know it's telling us we're lesser. That contributes to the lack of self-esteem and the self-harm that LGBTQI people have done to ourselves for decades.
Can I just talk to you about your own book for a minute, because you've spoken in the book and publicly about the pain that you went through just revealing your sexuality because of well, part of it was due to the fear of homophobia.
Fear of homophobia. I'm also very protective of my family with a distinct name like ours. When I was younger, I mean, it was terrible. You know, and had I come out sooner, I didn't want the rest of my family who share my name. There are like 9 of us in the world. We've all been bumped off by wars one way or another. You know, I didn't want to bring that sort of approbation on my family. So there was concern for my family as well. But to be honest, I was suicidal.
Well, that's actually one of the darkest chapters in your book, it seems to me. There's not a hint of humour in it. And there's this moment where you say, I slide the mirror of the bathroom cabinet open. There on the shelves are the pills. I have a plan. Yeah, and I did. When I was, you know, 11, 12, 13 and knew that I was gay and that this was not going to change and I had no control of it, I knew that it would mean an absolutely terrible life. I couldn't foresee that things would change so much. And as I said in the book, the difference between LGBTQI people and any other minority is that in every other minority group, the family shares the minority status. As an LGBTQI person, you're a minority of one within your own family. It is such a precarious feeling. So the support of the government on this issue to lead the way, I mean, actually the public's leading the way, would mean symbolically it is very important and it would really help. I'll just quickly go across to Tony Burke. Bill Shorten put this front and centre in his reasons for wanting to reject the plebiscite. What do you say?
We had a large group of kids come and visit Parliament House last week from families like what Magda's just described, and you know, a mixture of whole different families. And the way they put it, I found tremendously powerful, where they said, I don't want a national debate about my family. I don't want the kids in the playground to be talking about whether my family is as good as theirs because everybody's voting and it's on the news every night. The power of that, I'm not going to pretend to know what Magda's described. Of course I don't. You know, white, male, heterosexual, you know, you've got to go back 100 years or 200 years before anyone from my mob was discriminated against in any way. So when you hear people who are aware of what they might be about to confront and they're saying, please stop it, it makes sense to me that we stop it and we do the radical thing of members of Parliament voting on a law. You know, it's weird. We're having a national debate about whether or not members of Parliament should vote to change the law. That's why we have a Parliament. OK, I'm going to go to Fiona Nash. Now, the point that's being made here, particularly strongly by Magda, is that this should be a human right, not something that the public votes on, but something that just exists anyway. Do you reject that idea?
I do, and I think it is a decision for the Australian people at this point in time, notwithstanding everything Magda's just said. I mean, I'm a mother. I can't imagine what it would be like to have teenage children that were in that darker space that they were contemplating suicide. That would just be...
Sorry to interrupt, but I think that to think that people aren't going to, you know, become this argument will not get nasty and ugly. I think is really naive. I think that, you know, it's easy for us to all sit there and say, let's talk about this. But if someone is nasty about your family, about your way of life, about your being, you can't. It's very difficult to sit and take. It's not easy for an adult, never mind a child, to take. And there's families out there concerned. I just think that this is going to be a nice let's have a decent argument about this is really dumb.
Can I ask a very simple...
Hang on. Just let me respond for a sec. Look, I very respectfully disagree, and I think the media has a big role to play in this. They have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility to lead this debate in the way we all want to see it head. And I think, interestingly, the experience in Ireland should give us a bit of direction with this as well. And I understand the suicide rate went down. And that country, what they felt afterwards and how things went forward, I think we can take a lot from that.
Did you accept that?
But I have friends who lived in Ireland, and it was very, very ugly debate. It was some nasty, it got really below the belt. It was not, great, the outcome came out well, but I don't know if we want to put children and families through that. I don't think it's necessary when that's what the government's supposed to do. And like I said at the start, no one asked us when they changed it in the first place.
A plebiscite isn't the thing that necessarily triggers people being nasty.
Okay, yes, I'm going to give you the final point here because we're going to move on.
One simple question. Do you think I'm equal to you?
Of course I do.
If I was your daughter and being gay, would you think that I should have the right to be married?
I've been asked this question actually a lot over the last 12 months, and my response was that my view is still the traditional view of marriage. I love my children regardless of what they ever brought home for me, would make absolutely no difference at all. I completely respect your view and your desire to see that as equality.
But you won't give me my rights.
No, others have a different view. I don't think there's any. No, I think the really important thing in this debate is there isn't right and wrong. People have different views, and the nation should be able to determine what that majority view is.
But we have to do what this law says is right, when it's a human right to be free and to have choice.
Well, we're trying to give all the Australian people the ability to tell us that, and then the law will change.
All right, we're going to move on. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quandra, and look for fact checks by the experts and researchers at the Conversation website. The next question comes from Robert Brown.
Senator Hansen's maiden speech was seen by some to be borderline hate speech, yet she was lauded by her colleagues in the Senate, with the exception of the Greens. Don't the government and the opposition have a responsibility to rein her in if her opinions and her language become too extreme? Or do they let her be a loose cannon to preserve her support for crucial legislation?
Let's start with Jacqui Lambie on this. You were there.
Yes, I was there. Look, it is a free country. It's a free democracy, and I've made it quite clear before. I think a parliament is it's a place where it can be used under privilege, and you should be very careful that you don't go over that line. But I think when it comes to my problem is if what somebody says brings unrest out on the streets, that's when I start having an issue, because I already am already very aware of what the men and women in that blue uniform, our police and our federal police, are up against every day, and we should not be making their lives any harder. So when it starts to bring unrest on the street, then you're probably going to see me pop my head up very, very quickly, and what comes out of my mouth will be straight down the line, as if I'm back on a dual square in the armed forces. Because I will not tolerate putting those men and women in the blue uniform in the line of fire because somebody cannot shut their mouth is not going around the right way in doing that. It's as simple as
Jacqui,
that.
can I just confirm what it is you're actually talking about? Are you actually saying that Pauline Hansen's speech and some of the claims that she made about Muslims could incite problems on the streets? Is that what you're saying?
We're in a high level of terrorism. There's no doubt about that. Everybody's on alert. But you know what? You can't blame a whole race for a couple of bad eggs. So I just want to be very, very careful. I'm all about being a peacekeeper and a peacemaker.
So are you saying she could inflame problems with what she said? Because let's be quite clear about what she said.
If it starts to build up,
she said we're in danger of being swamped by Muslims, and further, she said they bear a culture and ideology incompatible to our own. So is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Well, yeah, what I'm talking about is obviously, first of all, if it goes too far and starts bringing unrest on the street, that's the first thing. The second thing is we do have a problem with with shadow law when it comes to Sharia law in this country, and it is operating, and it doesn't, that's been made very clear. It's been made in the Australian, and it's still out there, and that's actually getting bigger. We need to screen refugees and the people that come to this country. We need to screen them a little bit harder. I have no problem with that. Okay, but when it starts to bring unrest on the street, that's when I'm going to have a problem with it.
I think the thing about extremism is extremism in any form is dangerous. Extreme Christianity, extreme Muslims, extreme anything is dangerous. I think she's extreme. I think it borders on hate speech. I think she said the same thing. We're going to be swamped by Asians. We're going to be swamped by Muslims. To represent the people, we're literally, Rosie Batty said we're being swamped by domestic violence. There's problems that really should be addressed. Her fanning the flames of extremism is not good. And I think it's just ugly hate speech. And I don't think that's...
You've already made the point that you don't want to see, let's say, anti-Muslim groups using your songs as part of their rallies.
Well, I've got to tell you, anybody can say it. I think free speech is a great thing, but it comes with responsibility. I think free speech and hate speech don't go hand in hand. When Reclaim Australia started, I was watching the news, and suddenly there's K-San or Working Class Man being played while people are marching around, yelling hate and the thing that really annoyed me was they all were draped in the Australian flag, and they didn't represent me, and that didn't represent my views. It didn't represent the Australia that I know. Most of the people that I know in this country are tolerant, caring. They have problems, but they try to be understanding of each other. That didn't represent me, and I just said, please don't use my songs. Say what you like, but don't use my songs. You should have seen the mail I got. If we talk about this goes back to that last argument. The comments I got on Facebook and Twitter were absolutely horrific. People threatening my children. It was like, because I didn't want to have my songs associated with hate speech. They said that I was supporting radical Islam and I should be killed.
And can I just say, coming from my background, my father, my entire family in Poland, where the penalty for hiding a Jew was the death sentence, they hid Jewish people. So I know from my background where that sort of hate speech can lead to. Now, I'm never going to attack Pauline Hansen, but I will oppose her views. And what Jacqui was saying about power to the people, a friend of mine responded in the midst of all of this, she was saying on Facebook, we all talk about it, why don't we do something? There was a woman from the Islamic Museum in Melbourne who invited people to come and have a coffee. And this friend of mine, Fiona Scott Norman, said, why don't we actually do that? And so about 50 of us went and met with these women. Now, I have people on Twitter saying to me, you're a stupid lesbian. When ISIS comes in, you'll be the first one to go.
After my kids.
After your kids, But I'm not going to be divided by fear from other people. It's not I don't feel fear, but what I did learn from my father, you have to be more intelligent than your fear.
I'm just going to interrupt because we actually have a question on that subject, right on that subject, from Rebecca Stevenson. We'll go to Rebecca and come back to Magda, and then you can go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, Magda, you've written in your memoir, Reckoning, about your grandparents and how they really courageously sheltered Jewish people during the Second World War. And you really write about the impact that had on you, the deep impression that it left on you. And I'm just keen to understand what your position is on Australia's current treatment of people in offshore detention, refugees and asylum seekers. Thanks.
What I feel is that the argument, because they're playing politics with so many issues, it's divided into two arguments. Either that you take a hard line of stop the boats, or you're a schmuck and you want to let everyone in. There must be other arguments that are out there and other solutions, but they're never presented. And again, this is an issue with the media because the media goes with sound bites and more complex arguments are harder to get through. But I'm appalled. To think that we live in such an abundantly wealthy country and that we treat people in this way as a deterrent. Seriously, my family risked their lives to save people from camps like that. I feel my father was a refugee. So I feel a very strong...
Let's just be clear. Your father was saving Jews from extermination, there is a difference?
Well, you know, well, first of all, we don't know fully exactly what's going on in a lot of these detention centres. I mean, because of the laws that are blocking people from talking about it. But there are similar sort of principles, which is that basically believing that you live in a tolerant society, that you have compassion for others, that you feel for their suffering and that you do something to help them rather than letting them flounder. I mean, there are going to be millions and millions of more refugees throughout the world, and we surely we can find more humane solutions in the world.
I think somebody said, Peter Dutton said today that they're like Annis Island, Nauru were much better places to be than in the refugee camps of Syria. Is he serious? I mean, Syria is like a war-torn. People who live in there are devastated. So stick them somewhere that's a little bit better than that, and that's good enough to be. That's us looking after.
Now, Jimmy, these guys are your support band. Okay, we're going to have to hear them.
Yeah, of course, please.
So let's hear from Fiona on the combination of issues that we already talked about here, and you could start actually with the Pauline Hansen thing. Were you comfortable? Because the first questioner asked, should the government and the opposition be reining in Pauline Hansen? And then the second part of the what Magda has dealt with, you can talk about as well.
I'm very cautious when I hear the phrase reining in. At what point do we decide somebody should or shouldn't be able to speak their view and their mind in the Senate? And I think it's very important that we respect that we have a democracy and that people are elected by the people. And we are very, very fortunate in this country to have the democracy that we do. I don't agree with a lot of what Pauline Hansen says. I mean, we have, 2% of Muslims, I think, across this country. I think we are a tolerant society. I think we are, by and large, a very welcoming society that when I look, I'm over 50 now, and when I look how the nation's changed over the last decades, I think we have become a tremendous multicultural nation. I really do.
Are we, can I just put this to you, are politicians in the Senate in particular welcoming of the ideas that Pauline Hansen has put across? Because a number of people went up and shook her hand. Michaela Cash gave her a hug after she made a speech.
Of course they do. It's all a love fest. It's like having Party United party up there again. It's all newbies, like little bloodsuckers. It's like, excellent. I'm feeling left out.
Michaela Cash is not a newbie. Are you saying
no, that's what she does to the newbies. Trust me, Pup was all over it. We already knew. We're just like, no thanks, sweetheart.
So this is...
We weren't falling for that crap.
This is what are you saying? It's a kiss of the Spider Woman or something like that?
Oh,
the Black Widow.
Steady. Yeah. I don't think Michaela is a Black Widow, and that is for sure. But look, I think I'm not going to speak for other people and their views in the Senate, but I can tell you right now, people are reading so much into this. Michaela Cash is a hugger. I know her very, very well, and in the Senate too. And you'd know this, Jacqui, just looking around the chamber. It's a small chamber. We are respectful of each other, regardless of views, regardless of party. We do an awful amount of work.
I get the impression that they're sort of a bit scared of her, though, and that worries me. That other people where people who have different views are scared to voice them, and they're literally going up, oh hi, I'm going to go to Tony Burke
because the question was for the opposition as well, and a number of your colleagues went up and shook Pauline Hansen's hand at the end of that speech. Does that mean they were in any way affirming her views?
Look, first of all, it's true. The Greens walked in and walked out. I'm not sure that anything was said during the speech that you couldn't have predicted before you walked in. That Penny Wong made a decision to not walk in at all. Patrick Dodson, in fact, all three Aboriginal senators decided that they would sit there and be there for the entire speech. Different people had different ways of handling that speech, but on the key concept of is it inflammatory? You bet it is. But we also need to be careful here that we don't pretend one nation has more support in Australia than it actually has. The fact that they've gone from 0 to 4 senators has caused a lot of people to say, oh, there's this massive increase in support for them. One nation got a bigger vote in 2001 than they did at the last election. And in 2001, they got no one elected. Pauline Hansen on this program, shortly after the election, said thank you to Malcolm Turnbull for the fact that it was a double dissolution and there was a change in the way that the voting was conducted. And different people will crunch the numbers different ways, but effectively that's how you get from a 2001 result where one nation's vote was higher but no one got elected to this time around when 95% of Australians saw one nation on the ballot paper and voted for someone else. Now, it means over the next 6 years, that sort of anger and hatred that we heard in the Senate during the week, the volume on it's going to be cranked right up. But we should never pretend that that changes the fact that 95% of Australians are not holding those views, that 95% of Australians did not vote that way. We are a good, inclusive country, and there has always been a strain in Australian society, as there is in any society, that will try to pick out different minorities and go after them. The minorities over our history have changed. There's always been someone doing it, but ultimately, decency prevails. And that's what will happen again.
OK, I'm going to, thank you very much. I'm going to move to next question. Sorry, our question has a hand up there, but we're going to move on, I'm sorry. Ben Jacobs.
Jimmy, you've experienced the harsh struggles associated with migrating to Australia. What more do you think Australia can do to provide meaningful support to migrants and refugees? And will our current immigration policy ever allow for another working-class hero like you?
Listen, the thing that I know is that when my family emigrated here in 1960, 1961, we brought a lot of problems with us. We came from, you know, it wasn't a war-torn country, but Glasgow, I say in my book that Glasgow is the only place where you can get your heart broken and your jaw broken at the same time. It was a rough place. We had a lot of problems. A lot of the people that came on that boat with us, friends of our families, had alcohol problems, violence, you know, promiscuity. We brought them all here, and through we had terrible lives a lot of the time, but through that we came through it, and as adults, my family, my brothers, myself, people like Magda, we managed to contribute to the society, and that's because, you know, that we got the chance. We were given a chance to come here. It wasn't because we didn't have problems and that everybody was selective about who they let in. They just wanted workers to come here. I think that if we give migrants the right opportunities in this country, and along with migrants, it's kids in general. If we give good education when they get here, you know, make people feel welcome, have opportunities given to them. You know, I hate hearing about people thinking that migrants are coming to take our jobs. You know, that's not the case. There's statistics that prove against that. I think it's just, if we can support families in this country, I think the melting pot that we are, that has made us great, will continue to make us great, and there'll be great people come through it.
Now, Jimmy, in the acknowledgements at the back of your book, you talk about the times that you tried and failed, a number of times you tried and failed to write an account of your early life in Australia, the poverty, the violence that you just talked about. And then in the middle of the night, while on tour, in a hotel room, you're watching movies on the TV, and you come across the most unlikely movie, I would have thought, Snowtown.
Yes.
And somehow or other that inspires you. Tell us why.
Well, Snowtown, but you know, I knew obviously what Snowtown was about. You know, it's
a film about serial killers,
the bodies in the barrels, and the family and all that things in Adelaide. And Adelaide was my hometown. And actually, one of the victims, his name was Alan Barnes, and I remember hearing it on the radio and panicked because I thought my brother had been killed. But you know, I couldn't write my story down. There was so many. We went through so much as children that I just sort of pushed it away and hid it in a way. And this movie came on. I'd watched every other movie on the movie channel, and it came up. And it wasn't. My family weren't serial killers, by the way. But when the opening scenes of the movie, the first few scenes of the movie, it looked like my street. It looked like my home. I could see the violence. It literally looked like it was set in my street. And so suddenly, when I seen that, I turned the movie off and just sat there, and stuff that just swamped me from how I was brought up. You know, we were exposed to a lot of violence, you know, alcohol, you know, ignorance. It was horrific stuff. And you know, I didn't write the book because I want people to feel sorry for me, because this is, you know, woe is me, this is what I went through. When I wrote this book to let go of my demons and to open my wounds so that I could heal. But when I finished writing it, I could have ripped it up, but I read it and I thought, you know what? There's people out there still going through the exact same things as I went through as a child. People in Australia are still living this horrific life story. And that's, you know, we need to sort of support families. We need to, you know, the dialogue on domestic violence, and domestic violence is like plague here. If as many people were killed by terrorism as killed by, you know, due to domestic violence, we'd have armed guards on every corner. It's out of control. And we need to have a conversation about that. Well, part of the reason I wrote this book was to start that
we're going to come
conversation.
specifically back to a question on that conversation. But Magda, your book also is about the experience of a young migrant growing up in Australia, and you saw violence as well. I mean, at one stage, maybe you're a kind of middle-class tourist, but you did join a sort of Sharpie gang,
I wouldn't say
the Croydie boys.
Well, look, my background was not particularly middle class. My father was a refugee who came away from Poland with absolutely nothing and made his way. My mother was a working-class Scots lassie, left school at 14, and she worked on an assembly line in order to be able to pay for my school fees. So, you know, I didn't come from a position of extraordinary privilege. But I just want to say one thing about Jimmy's book, which is an amazing book and a really important book, because one of the things that very much concerns me is the high rate of male suicides in this country. And it's because there is a lot of men feel so ashamed of their pain and their emotions. And I'm really hoping that Jimmy's book will, in the way that my book, I know this, I'm not, you know, just saying it, because people have come to me and told me how it's helped parents of gay children, how it's helped them. I'm hoping that Jimmy's book, and I'm sure it'll be massive, will speak to those men out there who feel isolated and ashamed and in terrible pain, because that's something that very much concerns me, and I hope that it will give them a language.
Men in this country don't like to talk, especially about things. You know, part of our issues as kids was shame. We were ashamed of how we lived. We were ashamed of how our parents behaved. We were ashamed that, you know, I could see my mum fly across the floor, you know, or wake up with, my mum would wake up with black eyes. We were ashamed of all that, and we didn't talk about it. And when, you know, and no one spoke to us about it. And my dad was, you know, my dad was a great bloke. He's a really nice fella who had major problems. You know, if he had somebody to talk to about this, he would have been ashamed of how he behaved.
Was it a dangerous place for kids to grow up?
It was very dangerous.
Household?
It was, you know, it was so dangerous that, you know, there was, you know, by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I was climbing out the window in the middle of the night, and I was safer in paddocks, you know, across the street, sleeping on the dirt, than I was in my own home. You know, kids shouldn't have to live like that. I just think that, and you look at how to solve this stuff. You know, maybe these guys can help, but I just think a big part of that, like Magda says, is dialogue. Men have to be able to speak. Men have to, you know, be, you know, helped to speak. It's really difficult for guys to talk.
Now, when you said earlier, it's still going on today, Jacqui Lambie was nodding ahead. So tell us why.
Well, it doesn't shut him up.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. No. There is a lot of men do, and I have this same thing with the veterans, same thing with the farmers out there, you know, taking their own lives because they just, you know, they feel ashamed of themselves that they've lost everything. They've lost the family unit. They've lost out financially, and it is really, really horrible. And they just shut themselves down, and I find that really, really tragic. But I just want to go into, you know, there is a lot of families out there that are dysfunctional and living under violence because of drugs and alcohol. We've got a massive ice epidemic out there, and I've been very, very honest about that. So there is a lot of people out there, and this is really sad to say in this country, that are actually living in poverty. We've got 1/3 of our aged pensioners that are living below the poverty line. They're saying in the next 3 to 5 years that'll be 2/3, and we're an ageing population in this country. How sad is that? That we're not looking after our own backyard, or that I can't get mums and dads, can't get out and get free rehab for their kids that are 13 or 14 because nobody wants to put the money in for a bed.
Oh, hang on.
You know, I just find...
Well, let's not have the plebiscite and you can give it to the age.
But the other problem too...
Hang on, Fiona wants to answer that point.
And I do just want to address the point Jacqui's made around drugs and around ice, because it was actually this government under Malcolm Turnbull that we've put $300 million in, as Jacqui knows, to specifically deal with this issue of ice and drugs. Now, that's been a massive proportion of that, around $240 million, is going to treatment. What we've changed under this government is the focus being just around law enforcement. This is around treatment, this is around helping people, this is making sure they get the aftercare. We had the highest ranking, you know, police officers in the land saying you cannot arrest your way out of this problem. So we absolutely took it head on and we absolutely addressed it, and I travel around the country.
What about the core problem which is being identified here, which is poverty, and how widespread it is and how invisible it is to many Australians and to many politicians?
It's absolutely Absolutely tragic.
Sorry to interrupt, but there were people like who lived in the same poverty, who worked in the same factories as our parents, who didn't drink, who didn't gamble, and they managed to keep their children, safe. I think, it's strange to me if we talk about the ice epidemic when you can't watch a sporting event on television without getting 500 ads on how to bet your money quicker so people don't know you're spending it. It's really insane. And and alcohol is probably a bigger killer and a much more insipid killer than drugs.
I'm going to quickly go. We've got a question on that. I'm going to go straight to Kay Buckley's question.
Hello, Jimmy.
There you are. Hi. I'm deaf, sorry.
I'd like to specifically ask you about your decision to stop drinking.
Yeah.
And my own experiences of family, I am thinking that there perhaps is a strong link to genetics.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask, with some people, not all people, and I want to ask your opinion of that. I myself has escaped that addiction, but I am seeing with grown-up children that some of my children have struggled with heavy drinking. And as a mother, I don't seem to be able to have any influence on that, say the right words to have them listen to me of what's going to happen to you if this continues. And I just wanted to ask you about when you made that decision to stop heavy drinking, do you think that it's got to be your own personal experiences? And from when you stated in your book, which I haven't read yet, but I've read the promo, that you can crawl out of the darkness to go sober.
Well, I think there's a lot of things involved there. I think there is some sort of genetic predisposition to addiction. I think culturally, alcoholism really is handed like I make a joke that it was backhanded down to us. We were drinking from an early age. My father would give us a whiskey on New Year's Eve, and everybody around us, that was how they socialised. That was an integral part of social life. I think culturally in Australia, alcohol is just it's so accepted, and it's almost it's unfortunately my job as a rock and roll singer, I used to go up there and go crazy and just get obliterated and go crazy. And the more I did, the more records I sold. It was sort of something that was...
Well, here's a question that might be hard for you to answer, but do you think without the booze and without the drugs, Jimmy Barnes would have been Jimmy Barnes?
But I would have been Jimmy Barnes. Whether I would have been a successful rock and roll singer, I don't know. And
why do those two things go hand in glove, Jimmy? Why can't you be completely sober and still knock people
out?
Oh,
you absolutely can. You absolutely can. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to do that, and I joke about it, but it's true that I look back on my life now, and I look from the time I was like 14 years old until when I first decided that I know it's not the right thing to drink 3 bottles of vodka a day. It was the longest sort of slowest suicide attempt in Australian history. I think it was just the wrong thing to do. I couldn't sort of, at that point, I couldn't stop drinking. I couldn't just say, no, I'm not going to have one. I needed to get a lot of help. I had a lot of support from my family. I went and got professional help. I went to rehabs. It took me a few times at rehab to get over it. It's a very difficult thing to just, to bring yourself to.
So what would you say to Kay's, just ask what she can tell her kids about how to crawl out from the darkness, the thing that you said you've done?
I think a lot of it is, you can't force people to crawl out of it. You can't make them do it. I think you can just be there to offer support when they and guidance if they're trying to find light. I think people have to do it themselves. I know my wife, my family sat and watched me, and for a while they pleaded with me to sort myself out, and it wasn't anybody. Nobody could do it but myself. And eventually, all their support and all their wishes and all the help they offered did help me, but it had to be my decision first.
Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
In defence of my family, they've all had good lives. They're all educated.
Yeah.
I can see disasters coming
Yeah.
if particular members don't think about the actions they're taking and the consequences of those actions.
Yeah, Jacqui, you want to...
I was just going to say, there is some people out there in society where they really struggle because they don't have that family unit, and we've got quite a lot of them out there. I always find that people are more successful giving up drugs and and giving up alcohol if they have that family support. But right now there are many Australians out there that just don't have that supporting mechanism around them, and that's where we're failing miserably.
Let's hear from our politicians quickly.
You guys I know you
good.
fund a lot of money towards helping with these addiction problems and with drugs, but I really do think we need more, and it's more about educating and more about I just think the culture of drinking, the culture which leads to all sorts of stuff.
I will go back to Fiona then, and the culture. Let's talk. Is there a way of breaking the culture? I mean, it's pretty much entrenched, and as people have pointed out, look at the national sporting codes.
It is, and that's exactly where I'll go to first. The Australian Drug Foundation is running a tremendous sporting initiative. They are working with our local sporting clubs in hundreds of communities across the country to change the culture community by community. And they are being enormously successful. So I think a lot of it is going to have to be right down at that community level. But just going back to Kay's question briefly, it just really highlights the tragedy of addiction for family members. When we were doing all the work on ICE and the task force and I were going around the country, I mean, stories of this grandfather who was the most lovely fellow, and his daughter was addicted, and his two little grandchildren, who I think were about 7 and 8, had gone in to wake up their mother to take them to school and found her dead. I mean, just stories like that, when you just see this impact on families, is just horrific, which is why...
Well, Jimmy, I've got to say, your book is full of horrific stories. One of the most horrific is what happened to your sister Linda on her wedding day. Again, domestic violence fuelled by alcohol. Fuelled by alcohol.
And, my sister was actually... I hate to talk about my sister in front of other people because she's not here to sort of speak about it. She is in the book, and she was subject to extreme violence by her husband because he was just out of control and drunk on the wedding night and beat the hell out of her, and she never really got over it. But when I look at this, a part of, like you saw about family support and about dragging yourself out, but a lot of my issues and a lot of other people's issues they really start early in life. I think there has to be a lot more support for families in general out there. I think there's got to be our education system. Instead, I've heard people say, with domestic violence, take men when they're 17, take them to a camp and teach them about how important, the women's rights and how to be right to each other. You have to do that at 2 years old. It doesn't start at 17 years old. By then, it's way too late.
Let's go to the other man on the panel, Tony Burke.
Can I just say, because we can quickly get to what's the government program, but
it's very difficult.
Importance of the telling of the story that Magda's done, that Jimmy's done, I don't think can be underestimated, particularly when we talk about something like domestic violence, where so many families have a culture of, but you mustn't say a word to anyone.
That's exactly right.
Because every time one of those stories is told, there's someone who, for the first time in their lives, says, hang on, I'm not alone in here. I mean, and it can happen in books, it can happen in music. I mean, there was an extraordinary play that was put on by Belvoir and Urban Theatre Projects a couple of years ago called the Borkham Hills African Ladies Trip, where half the cast were women refugees from Africa. One of them told the story of watching television and hearing the word rape for the first time and realising that's what kept happening to me. And then that being told to an audience, and every time the stories get told, for the individuals who tell them, I can't begin to understand how hard that is when you go through that. But the difference that the telling of those stories makes ricochets around the country in a way that I think we can't fully appreciate.
Let's go to, we've got a question, actually it's on a slightly different subject, but it is related because it talks about a threat to the ability to tell stories and to become artists and tell your stories through art. It's a video from Josh Pike, an artist himself in Sydney.
This is a question for the politicians on the panel. As a musician, songwriter and creator, my copyright is extremely important to me. I'm a small business person and royalties from my copyright form a significant portion of my annual income. I was very concerned to see recommendations from the recently released Productivity Commission's draft report on intellectual property that the optimal term for copyright protection should be closer to 15 to 25 years after creation. This is simply absurd and would mean that some of the songs that I've written and still perform very regularly would now be out of copyright. It's hard enough as it is to make a living as a creator in Australia without eroding our copyrights. Are you aware of the importance of copyright to creators and the attack on creators' rights?
And before we go to the politicians, I do want to hear from the artists. So, Magda, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, everyone... Yeah, people would have seen when I said I'll leave the country, you know, if they reduce the limit to 15 years after the date of publication. I say that because in reality, I'm in a reasonably safe position. I know I'll be published. I'm 55. I still have concerns about my old age, but, you know, mainly I say that on behalf of young people, because if you don't have that protection, how can it be anything other than state-sanctioned theft? If you build a business and then the state says after 15 years, you don't own that, and Magda's going to come in here and take your business, how would you feel? I spent 8 years writing that book, and it required me, as it would have with Jimmy, to recall and re-feel very painful things. And you know why I did it? Because I hoped that it would help someone else. Like, if we don't... That's the whole thing. We talk about domestic violence. I used to work in a women's refuge when I was younger. First of all, it ain't just working class people. It ain't just happening in working class families. It is everywhere. And it's because we use our fists instead of words. And if I have any gift that I hope I can give to this country, it's an ability to use words and to have more mastery of emotions. I have violent emotions. You know, I get very angry, but I don't act on them. You know, I choose to use my words. And if I can help, and if Jimmy and I can help in any way, people find the words so they don't have to be violent, that's extremely important. And those stories, it's not the same. The homegrown stories are the ones that people most strongly relate to, because it is exactly their lives. It's happening here in Australia. So I feel very strongly about it, and I can't feel anything other than violated. I poured blood into that book, you know, really with the intention of just hoping to help other people.
Yeah, I want to hear, Jimmy, are you too high profile an artist for this to have any effect on you?
Well, you know what, this affects everybody, but, you know, I probably...
It would affect everybody if they did it, let's be clear.
If they do it. I don't know who the Productivity Commission are, and I don't know where they live, otherwise I would, you know, certainly visit them, but... no, I'm only kidding.
Terribly overpaid.
I know, but the thing is, when they say, you know, about, you know, they said that, like, the life of a song, you know, really is over in 5 years. For a start, I wouldn't have a career. You know, some of these songs that I perform with coaches were written 45 years ago. There's enough issues with. I think basically the recommendations are eroding and undermining the rights of a creative person. I think that
and the confidence at the moment, even without it happening.
And then the thing is, people like myself, probably because I've been around for so long and I've sold a lot of records and I'm an established artist, I will survive probably a lot more than a lot of young bands. If you take away the right for artists to make money, as well as publishers, as well as, you know, record companies to make money, that money is not going to be invested back into new artists, and eventually we're going to run out of, you know, of new artists. New artists, are, you know,
but also
we're nearly out of time, and Josh Pike wanted to hear from the politicians. So, Fiona, you're representing the government. The government will have to look at these productivity recommendations, Commission recommendations, and decide what to do with them. Are you hearing this message?
Absolutely, and Josh, thanks for the question. We haven't got the report, the final report yet from the Productivity Commission, obviously. But I think the views that have been put forward by our wonderful artists here tonight are views that the government is hearing. And
do you know that for sure? I mean, for example, is the Prime Minister has been a bit of a patron of the arts? Is he listening?
Absolutely, I know. And I've had discussions with my colleagues about this issue, and there will be a lot of consultation coming around.
Can I just quickly say, it's
with the
just,
sector.
It's not just the arts. If people want to dismiss us as flaky, it's medical textbooks. It's any kind of trade textbook. Anything that you write, or anyone in your family writes. If you write your family history, if you write your family history and it ends up in a library, If I was an unscrupulous producer, in 15 years, I could go and take your family history, make a film, not pay you a cent, not consult you.
One of the recommendations is that, was it called fair deal?
Fair
Okay,
use.
cool. We're going to
Fair
hit,
use.
so I want to get your instinct. I asked for Tony Burke's instinct on this. Is your instinct that that'll go down in a flaming heap?
My instinct is that there will be a considerable amount of consultation with those in the industry and the sector right across the board about this. No, that's actually a good thing.
Is that a good
that's
thing?
Actually
Well, I
a
hope
very
so.
good
I hope so,
thing. It's
Fiona.
about,
Tony
it's
Burke,
about
the other
listening
politician.
and what's going
He's
on.
I think
a quiet
it's-
musician on the quiet too.
One of the other politicians.
I think it's much worse than what Josh has described there. The copyright part of it, yep, that is absurd, and I would be stunned if the government even tries it. And if they do try it, I expect there'll be a very big fight about it. But it's more than that. If you go back, when I remember going down to the shop buying a copy of Circus Animals, there would have been something that would have come back to Chisel at the time. Now, a song has to be played 1,000 times before the artist gets $1 from a streaming service. What's happening now in terms of us making sure that there's Australian music, because of what's happening with the streaming services and the way it's shifting, combined with the challenges that we've got with live music venues shutting down or filling themselves with poker machines, we have a real challenge now to make sure that young Australians grow up hearing their stories in Australian music, because it's not going to be automatic anymore, and it's not just that.
Sorry,
issue.
guys, we are literally out of time. But I just want to hear from Jacqui first. So.
I'll just make it very quick. This is possum magic. Meet Hush, the possum. Where else can Australian write about Vegemite sandwiches, Lamingtons, pavlova and pumpkin bloody scones? Only Australian can do that one. So you know what? Your productivity commission, that's crap. It shouldn't have got there in the first place.
Jimmy, you've got 30 seconds.
I think that the term of copyright is a bit of a smoke and mirrors. That they're going to go, okay, we're not going to change that, but there's other ways that the creativity and the creative process is going to be eroded. There's things like parallel imports, where they'll just flood the market with imports from other areas, cheaper manufacturing, where there's no jobs in this country, and the royalties are going to be lower, and the artists are still going to suffer. I think streaming, as bad as it is, at least people are hearing our music, and they can have the choice to go and buy the records afterwards. But we want them made in this country and not brought from overseas.
Okay, we want to hear a little bit of your music, so we have to stop now. That's all we have time for. Please thank our panel: Fiona Nash, Magda Szubanski, Jimmy Barnes, Jacqui Lambie, and Tony Burke. And Jimmy, that is your cue. Thank you. Now, just before we go, a quick fact check of our own. Last week, we suggested man Haron Monis purchased the shotgun used in the Lint Cafe siege through legitimate channels. The evidence to the coronial inquest is that Monis was never a registered gun owner, probably acquired that gun from the so-called grey market. You can find out more on our website. Now, next Monday, Q&A will be in Adelaide for a high-powered political panel with the South Australian Premier, Jay Weatherill, the Education and Training Minister, Simon Birmingham, Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, Penny Wong, and former Howard Government Minister, Amanda Vanstone. We'll leave you tonight with Jimmy Barnes, Mahalia Barnes, Ben Rogers, and Clayton Doley performing the song The Dark End of the Street from Jimmy's new album, Soul Searchin'. Until next week, good night.
Oh, yeah. At the dark end of the street, that's where we always meet, hiding in shadows where we both belong, living in darkness to hide our wrongs. You and me at the dark end of the street, you and me. I know time is gonna take its toll. We have to pay for the love we stole. It's a sin, and we know it's wrong, but our love keeps coming on strong and steal away to the dark end of the street. You and me, yeah. They're gonna find us. They're gonna find us. They're gonna find us someday. You and me at the dark end of the street. You and me. And when the daylight hours roll around, and by chance you walk downtown, and we should meet, just walk on by. Oh, darling, I said, please don't cry. Tonight we'll meet at the dark end of the street. You and me, yeah. They're gonna find us. They're gonna find us. They're gonna find us.